Welcome to the Lifestyle First podcast, discussing lifestyle medicine and making self-care as easy as 1, 2, 3. 1 question, 2 research reviews, and 3 actionable health tips, all centered around the Lifestyle First method, your blueprint for the 10 key routes of optimal health and happiness. And now your host, lifestyle medicine physician and coach, Dr. Alka Patel.
Hello and welcome to Series 7, Episode 9 of the Lifestyle First podcast. And the theme that we're focusing on today is E for emotions. And the one question that we are asking is, how does your body contribute to emotion? And to answer that, I'm delighted to introduce you to my guest today, who is Dr. Kristen Lindquist. And Kristen, she is an associate professor of psychology and neuroscience at the University of North Carolina. And her research is part of a field called affective science, which is the science that really explores what emotions are, how they're created by the body and the brain, and how they differ across cultures and across our lifespan. So, Kristen, a very, very warm welcome to you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, no, it's an absolute pleasure. I'm very much looking forward to our conversation. So I wanted to start with something that actually happened yesterday with me. I was consulting with a patient with chest pain. Now, when a patient mentions chest pain to any doctor, the immediate area of focus is always the heart. So off he went and he had lots of tests done, which concluded that his heart was not the source of his pain. His heart was fine. This was not heart-related pain, but he was very anxious about his heart. So we started talking about how his anxiety would be contributing to his experience of the pain. And what he said to me, Kristen, was he said, "But doctor, this is a real pain. I'm feeling it in my body, not in my head." So, Kristen, I think what I wanted to ask you really was, how do we even begin to explain how emotion contributes to that physical experience? And in fact, vice versa, how our body's physical state then contributes to our emotional state. What should I have said to him?
Oh, this is such an important topic, and one that is so deeply misunderstood, really since the beginning of Western philosophy. So, Western philosophy suggests that the mind and the body are distinct, and that you can think away your pain, and that, something that you are feeling in your body is not something that is mental, it's not something that's emotional. And it turns out that all of the modern neuroscience research suggests that these assumptions are wrong. Emotions are deeply, deeply embodied phenomena. And in fact, all of our conscious experiences are deeply embodied phenomena. That is, our brains are constantly representing information that's going on inside of our bodies and using that to create our conscious experiences. And so the idea that this is a real pain, not an emotional pain, is a problem that really plagues modern medicine, as I'm sure you've experienced as a case in point with this particular patient.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's very hard to explain that, isn't there, in terms of terminology that's understood. Again, that connection between emotion and pain and physicality. Is there language that you think is helpful to explain this? How would you explain the connection?
Yeah, it is hard because we don't really have language to explain it because of these deep philosophical assumptions. But here's how I explain it in my work. Our brain's job is to keep our body alive. And what it is constantly doing is it's constantly monitoring what's going on inside our body and in the world around us. And it's making predictions about what the body needs to do next to maintain survival. And if everything is looking good, then it creates an experience that we sometimes experience as calm or as mild pleasure that says all systems go. If Though that monitoring process reveals that something is amiss, either because there's something with one of our organs that isn't going the way that it should be, or there's something that is meaningful happening in the world around us. You are about to trip on a crack in the sidewalk, or you encounter somebody in your workplace who has said things to you in the past that are threatening, or what have you, right? There's a wide range of things happening in the world around you. Then our brain says, this has impact ultimately for our survival. And it creates a sensation of activation. So it prepares your body to act, to deal with whatever that threat or challenge is. And it also makes you experience a sense of unpleasantness. And so these computations are something that is always happening throughout the day. Our brain is constantly monitoring this information because it needs to, in the service of keeping us alive and really efficiently sort of balancing our energy and metabolic budget. Now, most of the time, we're not paying attention to these things, and they're not at the forefront of our attention. And they can kind of seep into our conscious experience. So times that we have low blood glucose, for instance, as lunch is approaching, our brain is registering that something is amiss in our body, but we may not be fully consciously aware of it. And in those instances, we might just start to feel some negativity that in some cases we may accurately identify as hunger, and in other cases we may perceive as, a coworker who has malintent, or a spouse who's being particularly argumentative, and so on.
Mm-hmm. So you have in one of your articles, haven't you, written about hunger and emotion, and we're all very familiar, aren't we, with that concept of being hangry. Mm-hmm. So on the back of what you said about emotions being part of our survival mechanisms, what then is the link between hunger and anger in terms of survival?
Yeah, so a few years ago, we embarked on some research to investigate this very common experience. And in large part because it's something that we all can resonate with. We've all experienced hanger at some point. The English Oxford Dictionary now includes hanger as a term that means feeling irritable when hungry. And I was curious, because of my research looking at the intersection between the body and the mind when it comes to emotion, as to what the psychological and ultimately neural mechanisms of that process may be. So is hanger sort of a silly colloquialism that we all use, or is it actually a phenomenon that is shaping our social and emotional lives? And so we ran a couple studies where we examined whether people's emotional behavior was actually different when they were feeling hungry. And we did this in a couple different ways. In some cases, we just measured variation in people's levels of hunger throughout the day. And we saw whether their levels of hunger were more likely to impact their perceptions of the emotional meaning of images when those images were relatively more negative, more positive, or neutral. Mm-hmm. And what we found is that hunger did not impact people's judgments of, say, neutral images. So people were not more likely to say that any image was more negative when they were feeling hungry. And they also weren't likely to say that positive images were more positive when they were feeling hungry. It was really specific to negative images. So when people were feeling relatively hungrier compared to people who were feeling relatively less hungry, they were more likely to view a negative image, say an image of a fight, or an image of war, or an image of a dead animal, and to say, oh, that's really negative. Now, in a follow-up study, we actually manipulated people's levels of hunger by asking them either to fast or not to fast prior to coming into the lab. such that people who had fasted would have lower levels of blood glucose on average than people who had eaten something prior to coming into our lab. And we placed them in a frustrating situation. So a situation that would, on average, cause somebody to feel irritated at another person. And what we did was we had them perform a really tedious task. And partway through, it was a computer task, partway through, the computer showed them this blue screen of death in which, the computer had broken down. And we said, "Ooh, I'm really sorry, but you're going to have to do that all over again." And in some of our participants, we had made them aware of their emotions. So we had sort of primed them to think about emotion concepts such as anger or sadness. And in other participants, we didn't mention emotion concepts at all. And what we found is that when participants had not thought about emotion concepts at all, they weren't aware of their internal state. When they were hungry, they were more likely to subsequently lash out at the researcher, to rate them more negatively on an evaluation that they believed would impact their professional standing in our lab. Whereas people who were aware of their emotions were less likely to do so. And what we take this to mean is that these feelings within the core of our body, when you feel hungry, you feel unpleasant, you feel kind of activated, you feel kind of agitated. You may have physiological sensations like your heart might race, and you may feel your stomach clenching, and sometimes you may even feel kind of sweaty or like you feel motivated to go and do something. And these sensations are not specific to hunger, nor are they specific to anger, but they really overlap between these two different physiological states. And what we found is that people can really sort of confuse or misattribute the meaning of those sensations in the right context to an emotional state as opposed to hunger, which we think of as more of a physiological state.
We do. But I guess what you're saying, what I'm interpreting from what you're saying certainly, is that signal of hunger accompanied with the emotion of hunger, that sense of urgency and irritability and anger or being hangry, encourages us to seek out food and seek out nourishment. So that connection back to why is there an emotion with what is in essence a bodily sensation of hunger, which you feel in the stomach and that sense to eat. Why is that then associated with an emotion? It's maybe perhaps to increase that drive and urgency to take the action that's going to then satisfy that survival need.
Absolutely. And this harkens back to that notion that our brain is always trying to monitor the state of the body and say, is my blood glucose level what it needs to be? And if not, then it makes the prediction that it needs to engage this sort of motivation to go out and forage for food, to achieve the resources that will bring it back to adequate levels. Mm-hmm. And the neurobiology of that is associated with things like hormones like cortisol, leptin, and ghrelin. So there's a number of different neuronal processes that are associated with hunger, but it turns out that those same neuropeptides and hormones are also associated with emotional sensations. So we often think of cortisol as a stress hormone. It turns out cortisol underlies all types of emotional experiences and lots of different types of physiological experiences. But those sort of underlying core similarities between these states may be why people can associate emotions with something that ultimately is a signal that's telling them that their body needs more glucose.
Yeah. And is there a gender differentiation here? Are women more predisposed to the emotion of hunger? We do hear that said, but is there any truth to that in terms of the research and science?
So we did not find gender differences in this particular phenomenon. That being said, there are biological sex differences in how the body processes food and, fat deposits and so on. And so it's possible that there could be some underlying biological sex difference. And certainly, women need their caloric needs shifts across their lifespan. It shifts with their menstrual period and different features of their menstrual cycle, with pregnancy and so on. And so it's possible that a woman's body, a female's body, is a bit noisier when it comes to those signals, in the sense that their glucose needs may actually be fluctuating more.
Yeah. Okay, great. That's really good to just clarify. I think really important to have a bit of clarification there. So just talking a little bit more then about some of the physiological processes as well. And certainly you've raised this in other articles you've written, the sort of bodily contributions to emotion. You talk about inflammation as a core process linking with emotion. So we've got the sort of less tangible feeling of emotion, but is there a more tangible pathological or bodily process going on at a physiological level? Is there a connection between inflammation and emotion?
There is, yes. So research on this is revealing that inflammation, whether it is local or systemic, is associated with feelings of negativity, feelings of malaise. It can be associated with feelings of sort of activation. And it's not hard to imagine that that's true, right? So if you think about when you are first getting the flu, you have this feeling of malaise and discontent, and you just feel bad, right? And those are clearly instances where you have acute inflammation, right? So you are aware of the fact that you're feeling that way, and you may even start to have symptoms that allow you to know that probably this is some sort of a bug. But lower levels of inflammation can still be contributing to these sensations of negativity in a way that people may not be completely aware of. So for instance, if you can actually manipulate inflammation by giving people shots of endotoxin, which will cause an inflammatory response. And if you use a double-blind type of paradigm where people don't know if they got something that's causing them inflammation or a placebo, you can actually observe changes in their brain in regions that process emotional information, such that those are heightened when they are experiencing inflammation as opposed to not. And so this may be another way that your brain is signaling, hey, there's something amiss with my body, and therefore that's sort of feeding into your emotions. Now, from an evolutionary standpoint, it's hypothesized that this is adaptive, right? That, when you are feeling symptoms of sickness, that your brain is telling your body, you should rest and, collect resources and allow yourself to heal, but also you probably shouldn't, be out amongst social others and, expending energy and potentially even spreading illness.
Okay, so this takes me back to the beginning of our conversation then, in terms of pain, inflammation, and emotion. Mm-hmm. How, again, would you explain that to someone, that whole realm of not sort of psychosomatic pain, but, really there is a psychological element, an emotional element to pain as well. So can you explain that using the sort of inflammation model?
Yeah, absolutely. So a part and parcel of pain, neurally speaking, is a representation of negativity. It's a neural signal that something is amiss. So if you actually look at the neural processes that encode pain, there's processes that are involved in representing the actual sort of tactile sensations of pain. But you see really core to, and really frequently, these representations in brain regions that are involved in representing the state of the body, representing the sort of valence of those sensations. So are things good? Are things bad? And those same brain regions are also involved in vigilance. So in sort of surveying the surroundings for other things that might be amiss. Mm-hmm. And so you get this sort of cycle where pain itself causes unpleasantness and may in turn actually make you sort of hypervigilant for more unpleasantness, whether it's around you in the world or internal in your own body.
That is so interesting and so helpful just to understand that complex connection and just be able to just simplify it a little bit, to be able to explain it and almost gain some comfort from that as well, that these are real emotions. This is a real signal. This is real pain. This is a real feeling. And it's a signal to take action and do something that I need to do differently.
Right. And you can think of it as your brain is giving you the signal that something is wrong, and you shouldn't dismiss that as a mere emotion. You should see that as a biological signal that maybe you should pay attention.
Yeah, but also that there may be something more emotionally wrong rather than physically wrong, or there may be something more physically wrong rather than emotionally wrong. It could be either, right?
Right. So it because of the tight integration between these things, you can kind of get things working in both directions.
And now, here is your lifestyle first prescription. Your 3 activating actions to take you from knowing to doing.
Wonderful. So, Kristen, finally, can you leave us with perhaps 3 things that listeners can do today to just, I guess, sort of understand these concepts of the body and the mind, or the body and the feelings a little bit more, and what sort of things can help with that?
Yeah, at the risk of sounding too new agey, the link between the body and the mind does suggest that taking care of your body will take care of your mind. And so, it's not as simple as doing yoga every day and, you will have a life full of bliss, but being aware that you need to maintain your energy levels, and you need to make sure that your metabolism is healthy, because all of those things are linked into this monitoring system. And so what that means is that eating healthfully and getting enough sleep and getting exercise may actually be sufficient to setting your brain and your body on the right emotional path. At least that should be a first step in everybody's regimen for taking care of themselves, is making sure that first and foremost they're taking care of their physical well-being, because that in turn can contribute to their emotional well-being. For instance, there's research that eating fruits and vegetables as opposed to processed foods and fats actually does shift your emotional experiences over the course of subsequent weeks. Yeah. So I would say, go out and get some exercise, even if, just a short walk. Make sure that you're eating healthfully and that you're getting 8 to 10 hours of sleep. That seems unachievable for some people, but actually, it's a good investment in your future well-being. The other thing that I would say is that people can start to tap into these sensations and try to become more aware of them. I think, as your patient demonstrated, there's a resistance to that, particularly in our society, maybe particularly amongst certain demographics of our society. The notion that one should be aware of their body states, be aware of their emotions, understand why they're feeling the way that they are, feels too fluffy, or too it feels too sensitive for some people. And yet, knowing where these sensations come from can help us to allow them from further sort of proliferating in our daily life, right? From influencing how we see the world around us, from snowballing into something that then becomes much more challenging to deal with later. And one way of doing that, people vary in how easy they find it to pay attention to their bodies and to pay attention to their emotions. But mindfulness-based meditation actually is a really useful way of just beginning to pause and think, what is going on internally as opposed to what's going on externally? Yeah. And there are some really useful tools online for starting to do that. Mm-hmm. Yoga too, again, I said I wasn't going to say doing yoga will solve everything, but yoga is also a practice that trains you to begin to pay attention to your breath, begin to pay attention to your body, and to accept whatever sensations you're feeling at any given moment in time.
Yeah. Gosh, thank you for that. I think that's really sort of taken the conversation to that next realm of, I think what you're describing is really this sense of start with the awareness, be curious, be aware of sensations, physical and emotion, and then have this sort of openness, this willingness to let that be. And approach that with a bit of curiosity and mindfulness and acceptance that that's okay, that's me, and accept that. So allow that in rather than the avoidance or trying to deny these feelings and sensations or attribute them to something that may not. So that's really helpful. And of course, as you said, eat well, sleep well, exercise well, and then you will feel well and be well. So
you know that best of anyone, right?
Makes complete sense. Absolutely. Oh, thank you so much, Kristen. That was a really fantastic conversation. I'm sure people are going to be intrigued to want to find out more about your work. So what's the best place to reach out or find out more?
So people can find me at my website, KristenALindquist.com, or my lab website, which is the Carolina Affective Science Lab.com.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, I shall certainly put all those links out for people to reach out to you. Wonderful. Thank you so much. And to all the listeners, it simply leaves me to wish you all a happy, healthy day.
Thanks for joining us on the Lifestyle First podcast, making self-care as easy as 1, 2, 3. Don't forget to subscribe and share, and we'd love it if you'd be kind enough to leave a review. To learn more or to arrange a consultation, please visit www.dralkapatel.com. See you next time.